So, y'all are going to have to help me out here because my memory is not the best, and getting you to recall things will help you get your minds started as well. So we had a nice little Venn diagram going here. I don't really know where the end of my slide thing is. Okay, so we have over on one side the ancient Near East, which is including everything from Canaan to Egypt to Mesopotamia, and here we have Israel, right? Okay, what were some of the things that we put in the middle between these two? If you have those in your notes.
We put household idols for Annie.
Those don't ring.
Given laws. This is right here.
All right, so I got divine counsel.
Household idols on Annie.
Oh, okay. Yes. Idols.
And in the middle you have flood narratives.
Okay, we have flood, and what was the other kind of narratives both have?
Giving laws.
Good, creation stories.
Afterlife. Rituals.
Afterlife, rituals.
Giving laws. And Israel giving laws.
Priests.
And divinely for Israel.
Priests. Laws. Good. Religion. There was one other thing we had over here on the ancient Near East side.
Ziggurat.
Ziggurat. Good.
Kings are
divine.
Okay.
In the middle I think you had
Israel is divinely appointed.
Anthropomorphic. Good.
And you got creation stories.
You got that over
Good. Got that up there.
divine councils. You got divine
Councils.
Divinely given laws.
Divine
Yeah,
counsel.
got laws. Divine. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, we'll start from there. So, this is kind of just what we have one thing for Israel.
Divinely appointed kings.
Oh, okay, divinely appointed kings. Good. Yeah. Divinely, what do you say? Appointed. Cool. Okay. So this is where we're starting today. So we're going to kind of go through some of these. There's sometimes when I use PowerPoints, I really tend to not like them, other than to kind of help me keep things straight in my head. But today, since we are kind of going over a lot of things, I kind of wanted to use one. So we're going to kind of break this down into society and religion and kind of cultic life. But if you just, these headings up here will help you kind of keep things straight, and it'll help keep me straight as far as where we're going as well. So we're going to start with society. And what we're doing today, by the by, is called comparative religions, right? Where we're taking different religions and we're going back in time instead of doing modern comparative religions. And looking at how these religions compare, right? Looking at how some of the ancient Near Eastern cultures and thought and ways of seeing the world might have influenced Israel, right? Might have influenced ancient Israel and how they think of things. So we can very easily see how ancient Israel kind of fits into this worldview, right? How they came out of this same cultural mesh. So, when we talk about society, I think we started talking about this the other day. There is a social hierarchy, right, in ancient Israel. And the social hierarchy is very similar for Israel as it is for the ancient Near East. Okay? So we have a hierarchy here that's the same. What would that hierarchy look like? Who's at the top of the social hierarchy? Good. So at the top we have kings. Who would be under kings? We'll be good. We'll put royalty up here. Kind of cover that. Good.
Priests.
Priests. Good. And then kind of you have, you have a mix of just wealthy, military, aristocrats, right? Put that out here somewhere in that space. Aristocrats, right? And here you have your kind of working class and your poor and your slaves. And women and children kind of fall right into this space here. Okay. Now, prior to, you remember when we had that nice big timeline up here, right? Prior to there being cities and really organized states, you're not so much going to have kings, are you? Right? So prior to that, you might have these tribal leaders, but also what we see playing a really important role during this time before really organized states are these religious leaders, right? Play a much bigger role when you have much smaller societies. And that the way that we see in the ancient Near East and in lots of parts of the world, kings and royalty validating their power is to validate it through the priest and through the religion. This is why we have this kind of state-sponsored religion, this like really close interplay between royalty and the religion. Okay? So the kings are going to have concerns for like, who are the priests? What are the priests saying? And you see this a lot in ancient Near East. And kings of other ancient Near Eastern countries are going to go even so far as to saying, like we said, they are divine themselves. Right? Whereas Israel kind of moves a little bit more away from that and just has divinely appointed kings. Continuing with that kind of social structure, let me see. With that social structure are the laws that are given from the land, or for the land, right? Let me actually scoot ahead here, right? One of your questions was about the Law Code of Hammurabi, right? Which of these, and there's more than one, applied to both the Code of Hammurabi and the Torah? Did they enforce a system of justice where the punishment is equal to the severity?
Yes.
Okay. Did they explicitly mention caring for the poor, the widow, and the orphan?
Yes.
Did they employ the form, if this happens, then this will be the punishment?
Yes.
If this, then that? Did they recognize the humanity of slaves and have provisions to grant their freedom and compensation for injury? No. This was unique to Israel's law. Was it given to an individual from God?
Yes.
Good. Right. All four of those are characteristic of both the Code of Hammurabi and Israel's law code. Right? So we see, especially with this last one, given to an individual from God. If this is a law given from God, how are you going to question that? Right? This has a lot more authority. A law code has a lot more authority when you can say that this has been given from God. Right? This is a divinely given law code. Okay. So that's going to apply for both of them.
Can you clarify something to me real quick?
Sure.
Where it says explicitly mentions care for the poor, the widow, and the orphan. When I was reading, okay, it did not say specifically the poor, like caring for the poor, because I took it right here. It says, how you pronounce that word?
Hammurabi.
Hammurabi system did not offer equal protection to people belonging to different classes. So,
Right.
reading that, I took that excluded the poor. So I was confused. I mean, I answered, I put that in my answer, but I was just confused because I know it said specifically the widow and the orphan,
Gotcha.
but was caring for the poor something that we were supposed to infer from reading the text?
Yeah, we'll start looking at, we'll look at the Code of Hammurabi a lot more when we start looking at the laws of ancient Israel. But there are some provisions in there that do talk about not taking advantage of the poor. Now, whether they say like, oh, if you do, there will be this punishment, like that's something that's kind of unique to Israel, as far as I understand.
Okay.
And I can look back at that, but I'm fairly certain that in the Law Code of Hammurabi, that there's kind of this, this same kind of I guess, social safety net that Israel's law code is providing for. Yeah, good. That's a good question, though. So looking back at some of these other ones that are listed here, right? Patriarchal, right? You kind of went through that yesterday, talked about how men are the heads of households, men are in government, men are priests. Lineage is traced through the man. Okay. Right? Lineage is traced through the man. So when you read these family trees, right, in the Old Testament, we'll see time and time again that, right, it's like this guy begat this guy. If you ever see the word begat just means to cause to be born, right? Women are seen as very passive in childbirth. I think anyone who has had a child is like, that wasn't passive at all. but they're seen as just kind of like, in the same way that a seed is planted in the ground and that seed becomes the plant, right? That same kind of mentality applies to birth and procreation in the ancient world, right? The man's seed is all that's needed. That seed is implanted in the woman. The child grows inside the woman and then is born, right? So if that's the case, the woman is a very passive partner in that exchange. Let's see. Good. So this kind of gives us a picture of what society looks like for them and how similar it is between the ancient Near East and ancient Israel. You can very much see how they're coming out of the same social world with these hierarchies, with this patriarchy, with this close connection of loyalty and religion, and with their legal systems that are very much based in the religion. Okay, now moving a little bit more to religion. Who here has heard the word polytheism and monotheism before? Some. Has anybody here heard the word henotheism? Okay. So what is polytheism? Many gods, right? So it's two things we need to know for polytheism. It's not just there are many gods. There's the acknowledgement of many gods and the worship of many gods. The acknowledgement and worship of many gods. And monotheism, on the other hand, is what?
One God.
Put that in the same terms we just used.
The acknowledgement of one God and the worship of one God.
Bingo. The acknowledgement of only one God and the worship of that God. Okay?
Is the acknowledgement of many gods with the worship of one God.
Bingo. That is what henotheism is. The acknowledgement of many, but the idea that only one is worthy of being worshipped. Now, which of these is going to belong to the ancient Near East?
Polytheism.
Good. Which of these is going to belong to ancient Israel?
Memphis.
And henotheism. Okay. And instead of saying and, we can draw a nice little arrow. Henotheism to monotheism. Looking back through many of the older texts and even texts that are considered part of the Hebrew Bible today, we see hints of this in the text. This acknowledgement that there are many gods, but only Yahweh deserves to be worshipped. Okay? And that kind of shifts and develops into a very strict monotheism as time goes on. Remember, these texts are written over thousands of years. The traditions that they're based on go back further than that. And so we see hints of this henotheism in the texts. Okay? For example, in Genesis 11, with the story, Genesis 11, I think? Yeah, Genesis 4, with the story of Babel. You have this statement where God says, let us go down and confuse their language. Right? And we'll talk a little bit later about this idea of a divine council. Right? And this may be, too, where we get the language of a jealous God, right? This may be where this kind of henotheistic past may be where that language originally springs from. This idea that there are many gods, but God is jealous to be worshipped alone, and only God is worthy of worship, right? All these other gods are not worthy of worship the way that Yahweh is. So possibly hints of this kind of past within Israel's history, but then definitely moving into a strict monotheism by the end of the canon. Are there questions on that? Because I know that's probably a new concept to a lot of you. Does that make sense? Got some blank stares and some falling asleep. Good. Anthropomorphic, right? We put that with both of them. But we do need to note that in the ancient Near East, as opposed to Israel, we could say that they are more anthropomorphic. Anthropomorphic. It's a hard word to spell when you're talking. Okay. Remember, anthropomorphic means human-like, like an anthropod, right? It's a human. So anthropomorphic is having human form. And I say that the ancient Near Eastern gods tend to be more anthropomorphic because they exhibit much more human characteristics than the Israelite God. What kind of human attributes can any of you think of from the Hebrew Bible? If any of you are familiar with some of these texts.
When it talks of God walking in the cool breeze or talking.
Good. So we'll just have. So God walking. All right, even talking maybe can be considered fairly anthropomorphic. Walking definitely. Some of these kind of like move in and out of that space, or kind of like on the blurry edges of it. But yeah, walking, talking, resting. God rested on the seventh day. Why does God need to rest? Right? That's a very anthropomorphic depiction.
And then I read just yesterday where it said God seeing the light, like you have to have eyes to see.
Right, seeing, yeah.
I'm just giving instruction on talking.
Yeah, talk. We also have things like anger,
Yeah.
right? Jealousy. Where the ancient Near Eastern religions are going to go a little bit further than that are while God does all these things, God is still seen as very justified in these things, very holy still in these things, right? This is a justified and holy anger, a justified and holy jealousy. The ancient Near Eastern gods are much more human than that, right? They get drunk, for example, right? When we talk about the Epic of Gilgamesh and there's this worldwide flood, the humans, once they land, have a sacrifice in the same way that Noah does, and it talks about the gods crowding around that sacrifice like a bunch of flies, right? Just like swarming onto that sacrifice and smelling it. Because what's needed, and we'll talk about this in just a bit, for the ancient Near Eastern gods, is for humans to kind of take care of them, right? Humans have to do these rituals because that is caring for the gods, right? Whereas in Israel, we have a little bit more removed idea of gods. And this is where we get this idea of, it's just, here we go. That's what I'm looking for. I'll come back to it, sorry. It's one of those things I'll sit up here and like think about it for 5 minutes and won't be able to get it. Good. So they're anthropomorphic. Sorry, what?
I'm sorry,
Transcendent. Thank you. Somebody's had Miss Maley's class before, yeah? Have you had Miss Maley's class before at World Religions?
No.
No? Okay, well there you go. You just have that knowledge there. Good. In Israel, you have this, it's much more of a transcendent God. Right? You do have this idea of walking, right, in some of the early texts. But for the most part, you have a very transcendent God. Whereas with the ancient Near East, the kind of flip side of that is immanent. Right? And we'll see how, even in Israel, there's this interplay between those two. But these very anthropomorphic gods need human help. Right? They need human sacrifice and human ritual. Whereas, yeah, we're talking about these ancient Near Eastern gods, they require food and drink. They can get drunk. They procreate. They have sex with each other. They have children. Right? They're emotional. They can die. They're engaged in daily routines, right? They're even involved in community with each other, right? Making decisions together. Another thing to note, and this kind of falls somewhere between the two as well, is that they are geopolitically based, right? Deities are geopolitically based. And what I mean by geopolitically, if you break this word down, is geography and politics, right? So if you are a king or you are a kingdom and your land extends over so much space, that is the space that the deity owns, right? That belongs to the deity. And so as your space expands, so does the deity's, right? So the more space you have as a kingdom, the more powerful your deity is seen as, right? And we can see kind of Israel playing with this too, especially when they start moving into the land of Canaan. But they definitely start moving beyond this, especially when we look at some of the latter prophets. This idea that the whole earth is Yahweh's, right? And different kingdoms belong to Yahweh, and Yahweh gives to whoever he wishes. Okay, so moving on into religion. Talking about these divine councils, right? And these anthropomorphic ideas of God. In Mesopotamia, which is in ancient Near East, right? In Mesopotamia, the gods often make decisions via councils, right? These councils come together, the gods try to figure out what to do about some problem, and they all kind of make this decision. And sometimes you'll have this rogue god who will not like the decision and have some kind of war on the other gods, right? But you've got these decisions being made in divine councils. In Egypt, on the other hand, you have gods much more acting in individualistic ways. So there's a little bit less of these kind of councils in Egypt. And with Israel, we get somewhat of a combination between those two, right? Because there's a lot of places in the Hebrew Bible that we see these divine councils pop up, but because they are henotheistic and monotheistic, it is God alone who kind of makes the calls. For example, here's Psalm 82. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. All right, so here, again, maybe a hint of that henotheism. In the midst of the gods. This is from 1 Kings, and we won't read this whole thing, but therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne with all the hosts of heaven standing beside him, to the right and the left. And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab? Then one said one thing, another said another. And here we see them trying to make this decision, right? The Lord is seeking this counsel, saying, who will go for me? They're all saying this stuff, and eventually one of the members of this divine council says, I'll go and confuse King Ahab. Right? So again, this kind of idea of a divine council places Israel very squarely in this kind of religious context of the ancient Near East. Okay, I don't want to get too deep into this one. But remember how we talked about on Monday this idea that it's very difficult to separate the sacred from the secular. Remember, those two things are very much intertwined in the ancient Near East. That holds even more so for ancient Near Eastern religion than it does for Israel. Okay, so if you want to put something along the lines here, in the ancient Near East, how do I want to put this? We can say gods and the cosmos. It's almost in a way, I'll say this, like a CEO and company. And here's what I mean by that. Think of, if I say Steve Jobs, your mind automatically says, right. If we wanted to talk about the company of Apple, you could probably just say Steve Jobs and be fine. Everybody would know what you were talking about, right? That's how it kind of is. But you couldn't really go the other way as much. That's a little bit what it's like in the ancient Near East when you're talking about the cosmos, right? You have gods that are very directly tied to the cosmos. Here's a Egyptian painting. And we see here that the earth and the sky and the sun, right, are all depicted as deities. Right? They are deities. They are gods in themselves. Right? Kind of where this eventually leads is, in a sense, pantheism. This isn't exactly pantheism, but it's really close. Okay? So we have these gods that are pretty much stand in for this kind of cosmic event or cosmic entity, right? So you have gods that are the gods of earthquakes, the gods of storms, right? Gods of earth and the gods of sky. Okay? And this is kind of how the ancient Near East kind of combines these ideas of the cosmos and deities, right? They're very intricately linked with one another. Whereas for Israel, this is Israel's kind of depiction of the cosmos, right? It is totally created, and we'll see when we look at Genesis how much trouble the authors of Genesis go through to make sure that you're not getting confused that these things are deities, right? They use certain words instead of other words that would be really clear to use, but they don't want you getting confused. They don't want you to get mixed up with, for example, the word for sun, which is shamash, and the word for and the word for the Egyptian, or the I think it's the Mesopotamian or Canaanite god Shemesh, right? Which is the god of the sun, right? So they don't use that word at all. They say the greater light, right? So they want you to make sure that you're not getting confused, that none of this is actually deity, none of this is heavenly or in any sense like that. It is purely just creation, right? And so that's where Israel kind of starts to diverge from this ancient Near Eastern mindset, that the world is divine in the sense that these events in the cosmos and what they're seeing in the cosmos have some kind of divinity. Because, remember, they're moving towards this monotheism, right? We can't acknowledge that the world is made up of gods if we're only going to worship one, and if we're only going to acknowledge one, right? What's that? Sure. Okay. Also, kind of linking or together with this idea of the heavens that we have, right? Notice in English we can say the heavens, and what does the heavens refer to? The sky. And we can also have the word heaven, which is where God lives, right, or where God exists. This exists in Hebrew and in the ancient Near East as well. This connection between these words. The up there, the expanse that we see, and where God is. Right? This connection exists in ancient languages, including Hebrew.
Professor Reed?
Yes.
And you writing this on the side of the board, why you?
The kings, priests, all that stuff?
Yeah.
That was just talking about the hierarchy. I'm just kind of like running out of space between the two, trying to leave room for that middle
I
part.
was trying to put it in my notes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, I was just kind of talking about, this is kind of all under gods and cosmos, so I don't want to write right here, or it's just going to kind of get in the way of things. Okay. Good. So now let's talk about a little bit about cultic life. Okay, what does cultic life look like? Remember, when we're talking cultic life, we're not using cult in a negative or derogatory way. This is just the religious life, exactly. And specifically the religious life that's not being practiced individually but communally. Now, when we talked about temples, right, this is where we brought up ziggurats, right, as temples. Make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself. Okay. The way that temples and ziggurats are a little different. Here's how. In a temple can be thought of as a microcosm of the universe. Okay? And what a microcosm is just in a sense, a small depiction of something larger. Right? So we could say you know, the kind of racial diversity we have in this class is a microcosm of the greater diversity within the U.S., right? It's a little off, but you could say something like that, right? Does that make sense? How I'm using the word microcosm? That's a way that you can talk about it. So temples can be seen as a microcosm of the cosmos, right? A small depiction of the cosmos. So for example, this makes sense when we read Psalm 78. If we think of temples as a microcosm of the cosmos. He rejected the tent of Joseph, he did not choose so on, but he chose Judah, Mount Zion, which he loves, and he built his sanctuary like the high heavens, like the earth, which he has founded forever. Right? He built his sanctuary like the heavens, like the earth. Right? He built his sanctuary like the cosmos. Right? The sanctuary being this microcosm. And what you do then inside the temple, right, by maintaining order and religious order inside the temple, inside this microcosm, you thereby establish that order in the larger cosmos. Okay? So what you do inside the temple to maintain order and religious order thereby maintains the order of the cosmos. Let me see here. Nope. I was hoping I had that. Okay. And that's a good, and I think actually I have that when we talk about rituals. That's kind of the function that rituals serve, then, is maintaining that cosmic order within the microcosm so that there is order in the universe, in the cosmos.
Professor Lee,
Yes.
are you recording attendance today?
I am, and I should. So before we leave, we'll do that. Thank you. How did your mind go there in the midst of everything? You're like, you have not maintained order here.
I have a question.
Mhm.
So it started with, temple started with Israel?
No. You have temples in the ancient Near East prior to Israel. Yeah. For sure. Israel is kind of a part of that tradition. Yeah. Now, when we start talking, let me see, I'm going to skip to ziggurats. When we start thinking about ziggurats, then, here's how ziggurats are different. First, ziggurats are not pyramids. I'm sure you read that in your text. Right? How do ziggurats and pyramids differ? You guys remember?
Materials.
Not the materials. Not
Pyramid is
necessarily.
a tomb.
It's a tomb. Good. So the pyramid's a tomb. On the inside of the pyramid, there are rooms. There are passageways, right? Ziggurats, there's no inside. Okay? So for example, I hope it just goes, no, just skip. All right, this is the ziggurat, or what's left of one. Okay, there's no inside here. This is very impressive. Right, you just have this staircase going up. If this ziggurat were not in the state it's in, what we would find at the top is pretty much, a house. And this house was a house for the god. Okay, this house was supposed to be, in a sense, a shadowy replication of the god's heavenly dwelling. Right? And so these ziggurats provided a way and a space for the immanent world, right, our physical world, and the transcendent world to kind of coalesce. Right? This is where the gods would come in order to enter the physical world. Yeah.
That whole thing, that whole structure is a ziggurat, right?
Yes.
Not just a house that sits on it.
Yeah, whole thing is a ziggurat, right? So yeah, at the top we have that house, it's also a shrine, right? This is where the priest would go to oftentimes to perform rituals, to offer sacrifices, right? They would oftentimes take up offerings here, right? If the god is going to come between, the divine realm and the earthly realm, you better make sure that you have prepared a house, like, right, a guest house in a sense, for that god. Okay? So we can think of it as kind of, in a sense, like a portal to the heavenly realm. Now, the Israelite view of these ziggurats is a little mixed. And I'm sure you guys saw that in your text. For example, Genesis 11. Right, he's talking about the Tower of Babel. goes off on my Genesis 11. Right? Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we shall be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." Notice that the reason they're building this tower is not to ascend into heaven. Right? They're doing it to make a name for themselves. Right? And there's a whole host of things that can mean. They're not trying to get up into heaven. They're not thinking we're going to build this big tower so that we can get up into heaven. Right? That's never stated in the text. Right? And so it's likely that this is some indication of a ziggurat, because what happens to the ziggurat? It gets destroyed, right? And people get scattered. Right? So here we have a negative depiction of a ziggurat. On the other hand, we read this. This is Jacob's ladder, often referred to as. And Jacob dreamed that there was a ladder set up on the earth, the top of it reaching to the heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Right? This idea of like some kind of heavenly portal. And the Lord stood beside him and said, "I am the Lord." Then Jacob woke from his sleep and said, "Surely," and there's some text here, I didn't want to put the whole story. He woke and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." And he was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven." Which is the same language that gets used for ziggurats, right? This, a house of God and the gate of heaven, right? So here we have this idea. Now, what Jacob does, though, at that location is he kind of sees this spiritual ziggurat in a sense, and he sets up an altar, right? So Jacob doesn't build a ziggurat, but he kind of acknowledges this same function. He just does it spiritually instead of physically. Does that make sense? And with that, with Jacob's dream, we also have this idea of sacred spaces, right? Certain locations that a deity or the heavenly realm is more palpable, is more present than others, right? Jacob says, right, surely, or how awesome is this place, right? Not, oh my gosh, I just had a dream. It's totally coincidental that I'm here and not at home, but I had saw some dream, right? He said, this place is awesome, right? Because this is the place where these angels are ascending and descending, right? This is the place, this is the location where there's this kind of portal to the heavenly realm, right? And so that space is sacred, right? And that's why he sets up an altar there, because that space is considered sacred. Cool. So kind of continuing with cultic life, we need to talk a little bit about rituals, because rituals are very, very important. Let's see. As I said before, in the ancient Near East, rituals are caring for the gods. Right? The gods are hungry. You have the gods swarming around that offering because they need that to survive. Without those human offerings, the gods will perish. Whereas in Israel, we never really see this. We never really see this idea that God needs to be cared for. Right? We still have offerings, we still have sacrifices, but you never really get this idea that without that, God is going to perish or that God will be weak. If anything, God will get angry if you don't, but it's not that he needs to be cared for. And as we said before, it ensures cosmic order, right? You need to do these things in the microcosm of the temple, in the microcosm of this ritual, so that the greater order can be restored and sustained. For example, here's 1 Kings 8:35-37. When heaven is shut up and there's no rain because they have sinned against you, right? There's no rain because of the sin. And then they pray and turn from their sin, then hear in heaven and forgive the sin of your servants and grant rain on your land. Right? If people have done something bad and you are punishing them in the cosmos because of it, then they will pray, they will do these rituals, and please send rain again. And then it goes on further. If there's famine, if there's plague, blight, mildew, locust, caterpillar, if the enemy besieges them, whatever plague, whatever sickness there is, right? It continues talking about Let us do these rituals so that you can restore cosmic order. Right? So even in Israel, and this would go for both of them, this ensuring cosmic order is both seen in the ancient Near East and in ancient Israel. Right, now some things we see in the ancient Near East that we don't so much see in Israel are things like divination, where you find out the future through certain acts. You see that a little bit over here, but it's largely condemned, as well as magic. We can also add necromancy, if you'd like to be nice and specific, which is talking to the dead. Right? That happens once in the Bible, and then it's condemned. So it happens, but it's not good.
Okay, can you give me like a specific example of an anthropomorphic deity? Like, because I'm not confused because I understand what you're saying.
Right.
But are you saying more like a god such as Zeus, or a statue that grants people, like maybe a woman is barren and she wants to be granted fertility? Are you saying that is an anthropomorphic type of god, or
So
a
think
god
of Zeus actually coming to Earth and having sex with a woman,
Okay.
and she bears a son.
Okay.
Right? That would be anthropomorphic. In Genesis, God walking in the garden in the cool of the evening.
Okay.
That is very anthropomorphic. You're pretty much picturing God as this like glowing human walking around.
Okay.
Right? Whenever you can kind of picture God as a human doing something, right, that's very anthropomorphic. When you get into some things like seeing and speaking, we can kind of picture something that's not really a human doing those
Yeah.
things. But whenever you read a story and you're like, oh, like I can picture, some kind of superhuman doing these things, that's very anthropomorphic. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Cool. And this is why we need priests. Right? This cosmic order and caring for the gods, we don't want to piss off the gods and we don't want to throw everything out of whack. This is why we need priests, right? People